Good morning. Okay, that was the sign that we lost the kind of hip, cool 1920s jazz music that was going on, which probably means it's time to get going. Again, good morning. I'm Mike Brezonick. I'm Associate Publisher and Editor-in-Chief of Diesel Progress, and welcome to the Off-Highway Sessions. Before I go too far, I would like to first thank our friends at Integer Research for inviting me here to be with you. This is the third or fourth one of these I think I have participated in, and both from a moderator and a just watcher standpoint, I've always found these to be very informative and valuable. I'm sure today won't be any exception. It was worth the price of admission to see the other session that got things going, even though there's probably some things I could quibble with, but that's neither here nor there. Secondly, allow me to introduce Diesel Progress. This is the flagship publication of diesel and gas turbine publications. We are a privately held company that publishes 3 magazines, 2 buyer's guides, 4 websites, and 3 monthly e-newsletters, or bi-monthly e-newsletters. Diesel Progress, again, the flagship, was established in 1935 in the depths of the Great Depression, which I always find interesting, and it was founded to promote diesel technology. At the time, diesel technology was mostly used for power generation and mechanical drives, as well as machine applications, primarily commercial, marine, and military. Indeed, as Lyle Cummins, who is the son of Clessie Cummins, the founder of Cummins, pointed out in one of his books, diesel engines were a big part of what was the very first stealth weapon, the submarine. And interestingly enough, they're still being used in submarines, including all of the latest nuclear boats that are in the U.S. Navy, which uses either 2 or 4 Fairbanks-Morse opposed piston engines, as opposed, I'm assuming they're backup power in case they run out of atoms or something. In case you're looking at this, by the way, I'm totally analog here. I don't have a presentation because PowerPoint can sometimes be something of its own, so I prefer just to talk at you. Diesel Progress has been published every month since May 1935. I haven't been there since the very beginning, although sometimes it feels like I have. And as our publisher likes to note, we've been profitable since the 3rd issue. And since all of you are in real business as well, you understand the importance of that. Our magazine is distributed primarily to engineers that design, specify, and purchase components used in engines and engine-powered equipment, and that covers the gamut. If you look at the sample issues that I've left out, you will see everything from Kawasaki V-twin gasoline engines used in commercial mowers to very large engines used in mine haul trucks and things like that. That pretty much shows what we cover. We cover engine and equipment technology of all sorts, of all fuels, other than handheld equipment, airplanes, and passenger cars. We are commercial, basically. We have a global reach with both North American and international editions, and wherever you are, you can receive print or electronic issues, and it's all free to anyone in the industry, so the price is right. So if you don't get our publications, I would encourage you to either pick one up of the sample issues I have in the back of the room, slip me your business card, or visit our website at dieselprogress.com, and we'll be happy to cut down just a few more trees or harvest another crop of pixels to get you your information. Now that takes care of the preliminaries. It's time to move on, and the topic that our initial presenter will address in a few moments is, without Tier 5 legislation, what are the key emissions reduction challenges for the off-highway sector? I know you'll hear some very interesting answers to that question, but I can tell you that speaking from a more broad perspective, diesel engines, and indeed combustion engines of all sort, are being challenged as never before. The trend really began several years ago when the Volkswagen emission scandal came to light. Almost overnight, the concept of clean diesel was transformed from a reality and a goal to basically a punchline. And it didn't just taint automotive diesels. Diesel as a technology was painted with the same brush. Of course, most of us in this room recognize the reality of diesel and that it's more than 98% cleaner than it was 15 or 20 years ago. We all understand that the engines have advanced to the point that gases emitted from a modern diesel engine are sometimes actually cleaner than the gases that go in. And yes, they really do pass the handkerchief test. You've all seen it, where you put a white handkerchief over the exhaust stack of a vehicle or a piece of equipment, run the engine, and the handkerchief is perfectly clean. I've seen that done any number of times, as engine manufacturers have been very proud of the emissions performance. It also points to a very interesting aspect of diesel engine development. As you probably know, when they're doing advanced engine development, they use small filters to measure the particulates and then weigh the filters to determine actually how much particulates are in there. And in some cases, we have been speaking to the scale manufacturers. Their job is becoming increasingly difficult because they're measuring almost nothing, which is, again, pretty remarkable. The emissions period can be likened, I think, to the US space program in the 1960s in terms of how far the technology of diesel engines and aftertreatment has been advanced, and collectively how many billions have been spent by people in the industry. It's truly a remarkable story, and the industry deserves a lot of credit for how it stepped up and found ways to both meet regulatory requirements, which was obviously a requirement, but also provide their customers with engines that could still do the jobs they needed doing. Yes, there's some truth to the fact that in many cases, the end user customer really didn't perceive the benefit. He's paying more for engines, and they're doing pretty much the same thing they did for him before. But again, that's the government. And again, the engine and equipment industry and vehicle industry have done a remarkable job in cleaning things up. Unfortunately, that's not how John Q. Public sees things. The late astronomer Carl Sagan used to say that we live in a society that is uniquely reliant on science and technology, and almost nobody understands science and technology. And that's really true in the case of diesel, because the public perception of diesel, go to anybody out there who's not affiliated with the business and ask them about diesel, what comes to mind? The old bus or the dump truck that goes down the street with clouds of billowing smoke behind it, or they see the bus with the soot on the side and people, saying things like, "wash me," and things like that. In the media, and I mean the regular media now, where I must confess, 27 years ago, I came from, I've seen the word dirty used as a prefix to diesel so often that I think we're bringing up a whole generation of people who actually think that's what it's called, dirty diesel. Go figure. It's a shame, and it's actually worse than that, because lest you feel that public perception isn't important and doesn't really impact what you do, remember, public perception is what drives political opinion. And political opinion is what drives things like the sudden rash of very public proclamations, mostly at this point in several European countries, and likely coming to a state near you before too long, banning diesels and or all internal combustion engines by some date in the future, usually 2030 or 2040. Germany, France, the UK, Norway, China, and India are among the countries that have announced such engine bans. The list keeps growing, and last week, Slovenia jumped on board. And boy, when you got the Slovenians, you know you've got a problem. I can say that because I'm Slovenian. I don't know how many things with engines are sold in Slovenia, but they won't be able to sell them after 2030. Most recently, California Governor Jerry Brown was supposedly asked the head of the California Air Resources Board why California hadn't taken a similar action. So I guess I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that happen. Now, it's true that the authors of such legislation tend not to get too deep in suggesting what's going to replace all those diesels and combustion engines that do the work and move the people, and that's going to all be required in 2030 or 2040. Most often they point toward things like electricity, thinking that Elon Musk is the new prophet of personal and commercial mobility. Maybe he is. Although there are some people out there who are put off by the fact that Tesla has never made a dime of profit after nearly a decade in business, or that he's never come close to hitting a production target. And some people actually sort of have begun to suggest that he's a high-tech version of Bernie Madoff. Okay, that last part's me. But anybody who wants to hear more about that and my personal feeling on that, we can talk later. But Elon Musk and Tesla aside, there's something to be said for electrification. And I know this for several reasons. First, the places where we've seen electrification proposed as a solution are places where it stands to have a decent chance of actual success in terms of operating. Often new or potentially disruptive technologies are positioned to be the next big thing everywhere. But many of the electrification proponents are being a little more circumspect in how they're positioning their technology, and that's taking into account government regulations. So say you can't operate diesel engines in large areas of London, Paris, Tokyo, or Beijing. Diesel-free zones have already been established, but you still need to find a way to move people and goods around the city center. You still have to deliver things, and again, you still have to move people via mass transit. And those of you who are from some of these areas know mass transit is the thing. North America is a little unusual in our reliance on the personal vehicle versus mass transit. It's exactly the opposite in many other parts of the world. Electric buses and medium-duty pickup and delivery vehicles, which operate along very specific routes and come back to a central location at the end of their workdays, can do the job today. On the off-highway side, we're beginning to see the initial application of all-electric equipment. I was at a trade show within the last 2 weeks for the basically landscaping, light construction industry. And a European manufacturer was showing and demonstrating indoors, which is always neat to see, its newest machine, an all-electric compact wheel loader. The machine was almost the exact duplicate of its diesel engine-powered machine, except that rather than have an engine input into the hydraulic pump drive to drive the hydrostatic drive system and operate all the other systems, they replaced it with batteries and an electric motor. Literally nothing else changed on the machine. The battery system, according to the manufacturer, can provide from, depending on usage, about an hour and a half to about 4 hours of actual working time. That doesn't sound like a heck of a lot until you consider how that kind of equipment is actually used in the real world. On a lot of job sites, if you go around and look, you see a lot of machines move, do something for a few minutes, and then stop. And they'll sit there for 15, 20 minutes, a half an hour. We had right outside our office, I was able to have a really good view of a small hotel being built. And the two things that struck me were all of the machinery looked like it fell out of airplanes 20 years ago. And these were contractors that were fairly good-sized contractors in our area. And I was kind of surprised at the vintage of their machines. But I was also surprised at how they were using them. They would dig a hole or move some dirt or something like that, and then the machine would literally sit there for hours before anybody went back and did anything with it. Well, if you look at the actual work time, maybe that electric wheel loader makes a lot of sense, because the loader may just move something from here to there, and then if it was a diesel engine powered machine, it would either be turned off, or worse yet, what you often see, it will idle for a period of time before going to move something else from there to here. Hours can go by, but the actual amount of work time is actually a fraction in most cases of the time spent on the job. So the manufacturer of this particular electric wheel loader had analyzed how its equipment was actually being used and determined that 1 to 4 hours would provide, in most cases, a full day's work. And at least in most of its applications. And in addition, its design allowed for a relatively quick battery change and a relatively fast charging time. In less than an hour, say over the time period of the typical lunch break, you could recharge the battery to usable levels. These all-electric loaders have been on sale in Europe for a year, and they've been successful enough to warrant this manufacturer bringing them over to North America and launching them into the North American market in 2018. Another reason I know that electrification is real and is coming is because of who's getting heavily involved in it and what they're doing. For a long time, electric powertrains, both off and on-highway versions, were the realm of startup companies primarily, small niche manufacturers, many of which few people ever heard of. They tend to always, we hear from these kinds of people all the time, they tend to have a lot of PhDs and ex-NASA people who really are very wonderful and inventive and bright, but have very little understanding of how the industries they're trying to get into work. Over the last year, we've seen some of the giants of the industries, Cummins, Daimler, Deutz, make significant investments in electrification. Cummins, as I think you've seen, developed a complete Class 7 powertrain for an urban haul vehicle, and most recently, within the last 2 weeks, they bought a battery company. That gives Cummins just about every component needed within the powertrain except for maybe electric motors. But since they make generators have been doing that for decades, and generators are a lot like electric motors in many ways, I suspect that they're looking at a way to make their own electric motors and offer a complete in-house Cummins powertrain. That's the kind of thing that will let them bring economies of scale to bear that may make the concept of electric vehicles much more economically viable. As you also saw today, Daimler has gone into production with an all-electric light commercial vehicle, the Fuso e-Canter. And a couple of months ago, Deutz bought a company, another German company called Torqeedo, which has to be my favorite name I've ever heard of. They specialize in hybrid and electric drives, in many cases on the smaller end and mostly used in marine applications. But Deutz says that's not what they bought them for. This is going to be the first step in what the company calls its e-Deutz strategy. Along with those big names, we have a lot of other well-known names such as Meritor, Dana, Axletech, Oerlikon, Parker Hannifin. All of them have made major investments or launched electrification products to the market. Every day we're reporting on what's happening, and the pace involving electrification is something I haven't seen in my 27 years of covering the industry. It might not all happen next week or next month, but on the short term, all of the companies I mentioned see opportunity to make actual money. And I believe in the old saying, no matter what happens, follow the money. So I believe electrification is real. And for the final piece of evidence, and this may seem a little self-serving, but I'll tell you anyway about New Power Progress. It is a new website, newsletter, and quarterly print publication that we're putting in regular issues of Diesel Progress that we have begun. The print version is included in the October issue, and a few samples are in the back of the room. Having said all that, electrification won't work everywhere. Class 8 trucks, again, has been pointed out, is one example. To have sufficient energy storage to haul, say, a load of hogs from Iowa to Oregon would require so many batteries that you couldn't haul very many hogs. When batteries take the place of payload, it's a problem for the trucking industry. Similarly, high-hour use applications such as open-pit mining equipment, like haul trucks particularly, would be tough for an all-electric vehicle because of the long work cycles and requirements for quick refueling. Although ironically, open pit mining has been using electric shovels for a very long time, the difference being they're actually connected by a cable to the power source. Not mobile, yet not. All this will be solved, the most diehard electric advocates say, when the next battery breakthrough occurs. And I guess the only thing I would say to that is, they've been working on the next battery breakthrough for about 100 years, and it's hard to see any kind of quantum leap too soon, other than, as I mentioned to Tim Chaney this morning, unless the scientist from Back to the Future shows up with Mr. Fusion. So I also submit to you that for all the growth and promise of electrification, it's not going to be the only game in town. When it comes to energy and power, people are always looking for the silver bullet, the one thing that's going to be used across a board, but it's never been like that. It's always been a situation where one technology works here, another thing works there. Gasoline is the choice in one segment. A great example is commercial turf equipment where the horsepowers go up into the 40s. Diesel is used everywhere, as we know. Natural gas works in some segments. Propane works in some segments. Hybrid works in some segments. All electric vehicles and equipment will work somewhere else. Diesel is going to be with us for an awfully long time. thanks to the continuing development by engine and after-treatment manufacturers, it's going to remain one of the key parts in the range of options that will be used to power equipment and vehicles for decades to come. There will doubtless be more regulation to come at some point. The current administration won't be around forever. But I have no doubt that diesels will continue their march toward near zero emissions. So while there isn't likely to be a Tier 5 on the horizon anytime really soon, again with the current administration's well-known dislike of anything close to regulation, I think it's unlikely we're going to see any rollback of the standards that are already on the books. The development money's been spent, and the manufacturers don't see much of an advantage to taking a step back. And incidentally, I did recently talk to Ed Pence, the brother of Vice President Pence, about that very thing. And I think it's very likely that whatever is on the books now is probably okay, but we just won't see any new federal regulations concerning diesel for a while, nothing like Stage 5. I think where it's much more likely is the California Air Resources Board will promulgate some sort of standard of its own, which they have done before because they have special status under the Clean Air Act amendments. And other states, when they establish their similar to Stage 5 standards, other states may choose to opt in, which they have the choice to do. Beyond that, there's a whole big world out there that has many lesser regulated reasons, all of which will ultimately move closer toward the emissions rules seen in first world areas. And that's a good thing, because regardless of whether or not you believe in climate change, cleaner air is, for all of us, is never up.